16 hours. On September 22nd, 2013, Lynn and I spent 16 hours in the Vanderbilt emergency room. I had awakened in the middle of the night and had chest pain in my back like I've never experienced before. My family has a history of coronary artery disease. Grandfather, mother, brother, other family members have died from heart attacks. So I wake up like this and can't, I'm thinking first indigestion, how guys are. We tend to want to downplay it. But after a while, it's not going away, and it doesn't really feel like indigestion. So I wake her up and say, I think we're going to make a trip downtown. Didn't know if I was having a heart attack, but if I wasn't, I was about to, because she was driving on two wheels most of the way going from Donaldson to downtown. But we got there safely in one piece. And when you think about, you walk into an emergency room, of course, immediately they want to know what's going on. You say, I think I might be having a heart attack. Does that change things for the emergency room personnel? Just like that. I mean, suddenly they're focused altogether different. Because we'd walked in, and, I didn't come in, there's no ambulance that's got the flashing red lights that are cutting through the darkness of the night. No ear-shriveling sounds that are piercing this quiet of the evening. I just walk in, and Lynn walks in beside me. So they walk in. When we come in, people might think, well, he's the patient, or she's the patient, or maybe they're here to see someone. They don't really know. And when you walk in like that, then they think, heart attack? You look like you're doing just fine. When you consider, you go to emergency room, what's the first thing they have to do? They got to do some tests, don't they? Got to do some diagnosis, determine exactly what is going on with you. You give us some symptoms, but we got to determine for ourselves exactly what is happening. So they quickly began the diagnosis. They wanted to know the answer to the question, what was the condition of my heart? Today, my message is titled, What is your heart condition? It's important for us to think about heart condition. September 29th, in case you didn't know, September 29th is World Heart Day. This is a day that was created in the year 2000 to inform people around the globe about heart disease and stroke and the dangers, that these are the leading cause of death in the world, claiming 17.3 million lives a year. And those numbers are going up always. By 2030, it's expected that 23 million people will die from cardiovascular disease annually, which is more than the entire population of Australia. So we think about 23 million people a year dying. So let me ask you again, what is your heart condition? Comedian Woody Allen once said, it's hard to get your heart and your head to agree in life. He said, in my case, they're not even friendly. Sometimes our head and our heart are not friendly either. This morning we're going to read from Scripture, and we're going to learn the importance of the answer to that question, what is your heart condition? We'll be looking back in the Old Testament at 1 Samuel chapter 16. We'll have this is from the English Standard Version for those who have your Bibles with you, but we'll also have the passages on screen here. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. What is your heart condition? Only a diagnosis would reveal the answer to that question. 3 things concerning a diagnosis that you and I must be aware of if we want to be like David. Now we know David's story as the guy who killed Goliath. But more importantly than that, he's the shepherd boy who became the king of Israel. And he was described as being a man after God's own heart. Well, that's the kind of heart I want to have. I want to be a man after God's own heart. And I have to do diagnosis to determine if that's the case. So 3 things we have to look at. Number 1, in diagnosis, appearance doesn't matter. You can be a good, moral person, but you don't have a heart after God's own heart. Number 2, in diagnosis, stature doesn't matter. Your position in the community, your position in your business, in the family, in the church, they don't matter when we talk about a heart for God. And number 3, in diagnosis, testing reveals the true condition, because heart is all that truly matters. So let's kind of break these 3 things down this morning. In diagnosis, appearance doesn't matter. The emergency room personnel were unsure since I just walked in. They don't know if I'm coming in for a splinter under a fingernail or just checking on someone else. We went on vacation a few years ago to Pagosa Springs, Colorado. If you've never been, it's out in the southwestern portion of the state. It gets about 190 inches of snowfall a year. You folks from Buffalo, you can kind of relate to those numbers, I'm sure. A good friend of ours, Mary Creason, joined us. And part of our time there, we decided we're going to do this bus ride from Durango, Colorado to Silverton. Silverton is an old mining town. It's on the National Historic Register. It's a great little city there, great little town. About 400 people live there year-round. But it's a wonderful touristy spot. And on this bus ride, we took what's called the $1 Million Highway, and we're driving up through the Rocky Mountains there, and it's just gorgeous scenery. I mean, you got these 14,000 feet peaks that are just piercing the clear blue sky. It's a sunshiny day. It's just glorious because we have mountains in Tennessee, but nothing like that, of course. So it's incredible views for us. And we got to spend about 3 or 4 hours there in Silverton and decided instead of taking the bus back, we'd ride this old narrow gauge train back. It's a 4-hour ride. Okay, this will be fun. So we did this 4-hour ride, and you start out through some of the mountain meadows. It's down in the valley there. But as we rode, the farther we went, the more we're climbing in altitude. And the scenery changes from a mountain meadow to this grand vista of the Rocky Mountains. And we saw that we went from flat to where it was more like this. We're running along the side of this mountain, but it is on the side of a mountain. And we get to one point that it's probably 100 to 150 feet below the train bed down to the bottom of the ravine. Well, this is a gorgeous scene. So most everyone on the train comes over to the left side of the train and looking out the windows at this gorgeous scenery, other than Mary Creason. Our friend Mary Creason is staying over here on the right side, and she's afraid because everyone has moved to the left that it's going to cause the train to tipple over and fall down into the ravine. That's Mary's thinking. And she doesn't want the train to fall over, of course, so what is she doing? She's thinking, how can I get people to come over here and look? She said, hey, look over here. There's great scenery here. There's tigers and mountains and mountain lions and bears. Oh, my. She was afraid. Does your heart ever feel like it's filled with fear? Sometimes we didn't anticipate that. You've experienced that. You're out driving along, and all of a sudden you look in your rearview mirror, and you see the blue lights flashing behind you. What happens to your heart rate? Choom. And you're afraid to breathe, and then suddenly they zoom past you. And you go, But for those few moments, you were filled with fear. Any of us can be. But sometimes when we're filled with fear, when we're consumed by fear, we can still put on the appearance of great calmness. Remember we said now appearance doesn't matter. I can have an appearance of being greatly calm even though my heart rate has tripled because of fear. Appearance can mask a heart that is filled with fear. This morning Bible study we're talking about the people who have heard of the Lord but have not given their life to Him. And on the outside, I'm good. I don't believe there's any afterlife. There's nothing. There's no heaven or hell. But inside I have to wonder sometimes, are they really quietly questioning their commitment to that statement? I think sometimes they wonder. But on the outside, nope, I'm good. Don't need your God. Appearances can be deceiving. In Matthew 27, we're going to just take a little trip here to the New Testament. Jesus has been taken before Pilate for a decision concerning his fate. A decision whether Jesus or the criminal Barabbas was going to be released to the crowd. The crowd, of course, is out there screaming, we want Barabbas, we want Barabbas. So in verse 22, we're going to pick up, we're going to see how fear is driving the decision and the actions by this governor that's been appointed by Rome. Pilate asked them, what then should I do with Jesus, who is called Messiah? They all answered, crucify him. Then he said, why? What has he done wrong? They kept shouting, crucify him, all the more. When Pilate saw he was getting nowhere, but that a riot was starting instead, he took some water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself. Pilate's heart was consumed with fear. He looks out and he sees this crowd, they're screaming, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. and he's afraid a riot's going to break out. He's appointed by Rome, and he knows if he loses control of this town, this city, that he's going to be out as governor. We all like job security. We get that. Fear is driving his decisions. He says, okay, hey, whatever you guys want, here, I've washed my hands. It's on you. It's not on me. Fear. We can be consumed by fear. Pilate was. When we read 1 Samuel 16, we see how God's prophet Samuel was also dealing with fear. He's been directed by God to go and anoint Israel's new king. Samuel's experiencing fear over this because he'd been dealing with Saul, who was Israel's first king. In verse 2, Samuel asked, how can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me. We don't have a death wish. People don't say, I wish somebody would kill me today, or I want to go do something that'll put me in jeopardy. Well, you don't think that way. Samuel is just like us. He is God's prophet, but he still experiences all the emotions that you and I do. He said, how can I go? Saul will hear about this and he'll kill me. Wow, fear. He doesn't want to do this. Appearances can hide the fear that one feels in their heart. When we talked about the heart diagnosis, appearance doesn't matter. Appearances can hide other darker tendencies of the heart. A young lady named Ashley Farley in California recently discovered she's been involved with a young man who's got a very dark heart. Ashley came home from work just a few days ago, and she discovered that her beloved Pomeranian pup, Ella, is not at the house. And she's looking for Ella, can't find Ella. Her boyfriend comes out and kind of got this evil little grin. He said, you won't find her. I sold her while you were at work, and you'll never see her again. And of course, she is distraught. This is her baby. She said, I felt like I just had a hole punctured in my heart. This guy, he's got this dark side to him, and she knew nothing about that. He breaks up with her after he's told her about this, and he leaves. Well, she goes to the local TV stations, and she's reporting this, and it's broadcast on the air. And fortunately, the couple that had bought Ella saw this and got in touch with Ashley and gave her dog back. She said they were just the sweetest people I've ever met, so they didn't even want any money to give Ella back to me. But you see, she saw none of this in this boyfriend. She saw nothing indicated that he is not a good person. On the appearances of the outside, the surface area, it all looked good. You see, appearances, when we talk about diagnosis, appearance doesn't matter. We can have a dark heart. We can have a heart that's filled with hate, a heart that's filled with spite, that's missing totally on the element of love. Ashley experienced that herself. We can deceive ourselves. We can look in the mirror and say, I'm a good person. I do a lot. I was saved when I was 6 years old. But what have I done for God lately? It's one thing to say, I've given my life, but have I actually served the Lord? Am I giving to Him? Does my life speak for Him? What have I done lately? I could look in the mirror and say, I'm good, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven. And that would be true. But God also says, I've called you to do more than just be saved. We can look in the mirror and say, I'm a good person. Other people think that about themselves. I'm a good moral person. Saul had violated. Now he thinks I'm God's king. I'm his chosen king of Israel. And his appearance to himself was good, but he had violated one of God's specific commands. Because of this, the Lord's determined that someone new is going to be ruling over Israel. So he sent Samuel to the home of Jesse. In 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, we read, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and said, certainly the Lord's anointed one is here before him. Eliab is Jesse's oldest son. In this culture, firstborn son is the preeminent one. He's the one who's given the birthright. He gets more in the inheritance when that time comes. He's got to be the guy, is what Samuel thinks. He's looking at him, tall, handsome young man, got to be the one. Samuel, though, was taken in by the appearance. God wants Samuel to look beyond that. He wants you and me, as we look at ourselves, we look at others, to look beyond the appearance. In verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance. Do not look at his appearance. Because God says, I look deeper than that. Appearances are deceiving. We read in Isaiah 53:2, and this is speaking of Jesus. This is prophetic. For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him. He's saying, Jesus wasn't a handsome guy. He wasn't going to be on the cover of any magazine in today's world. He's just an ordinary dude. Had no beauty that we should desire him. Jesus is not going to be starring in a movie. He's not going to have his own TV show because he doesn't look Hollywood type. Jesus was more than that. Jesus described, the Pharisees described them as whitewashed tombs. He wasn't talking about that they got a really pale complexion. He's saying that you are spiritually empty. You've got nothing inside you. In diagnosis, appearance doesn't matter. When I went in that morning, the emergency room personnel didn't look at me and say, well, you look like you're doing okay, so we can rule out heart attack as a problem. They didn't rely upon appearances. So back to the question of the day, what is your heart condition? We know appearance doesn't matter, but also in diagnosis, stature doesn't matter. I read an interesting article about hummingbirds. Hummingbirds have race car hearts that eat oxygen at this eye-popping rate. Their hearts are built of thinner, leaner fiber than ours are. Arteries are stiffer and more taut than our arteries. Their hearts are stripped to the skin for this mad war against gravity and inertia, this mad search for food, this insane idea of flight. They're tiny little birds. Their hearts beat 10 times a second. I mean, it is motoring. It can go up to 1,200 beats a minute. So if you could put your huge ear against their tiny little chest, you probably would hear nothing more than just a buzz because it's so fast. Now, the price of their ambition in life, well, it leads them closer to death. They suffer more heart attacks, more aneurysms, and ruptures than any other living creature. It's expensive to fly. You burn out. You fry the machine. You melt the engine. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, the biggest heart in the world is inside the blue whale. It weighs more than 7 tons. It's as big as a room. It is a room with 4 chambers. A child could walk around inside the heart, head held high, only having to bend over when they went through the valves. Now, the valves in the heart of this blue whale, they're the size of the swinging doors you'd see in a saloon or something. That's how large the blue whale's heart is. Every creature on earth has approximately 2 billion heartbeats to spend in a lifetime. You can spend them slowly, like a tortoise, and live to be about 200 years old. Or you can spend them really rapidly, like a hummingbird, and live to be maybe a maximum of 2 years old. What kind of heart do you have? Is your heart beating to the rhythm, the songs of praise of God? Is your heart beating for eternity? Or is your heart more like the pulse of the city, the job, the constant striving for possessions and property and the ways of the world? What is your heart like? See, stature doesn't matter. Someone will be walking around with their head held high and have a bad physical heart. We had a couple ladies in church we led before. One, Melrose Johnson. Melrose Johnson, she looked good. I mean, she's about 6 foot tall, healthy woman, but she had a pacemaker installed. So doctors could monitor her heart because she'd had heart problems. Miss Carrie Beatty was probably about 5'4". She also had a monitor on her heart, so doctors could take care of her as well. You see, appearance doesn't always tell us the story. How tall you stand doesn't tell us the story. The stature can reflect much more than your physical uprightness. We look at people's stature, we consider what's your position in business, your position in politics, entertainment, or the sports world, and declare them healthy. But it's not always true. If you go to Vanderbilt Hospital, you'll find the Rascal Flatts surgery wing. Some people say, well, now, those are some folks, those are some singers. I mean, they got a big heart. Okay, they have a generous heart. But does it tell us anything about their spiritual heart? We don't know. They may all know Christ. Maybe none of them are saved. But in the eyes of the world, their stature, their uprightness is to be commended. Samuel saw Eliab. Jesse's oldest son, is the honored one in the family, so he's got to be the guy that God's going to choose for the next king of Israel. I mean, Eliab, he's got to be experienced. He could be instrumental in running his father's day-to-day business, making decisions, making money for the family. So he sees, got to be the next king. God says, don't look at the physical stature. Don't look at his stature, his status within the family. Do not look at his stature. This has to be difficult for Samuel because he's been working with Saul. He sees this impressive-looking young man, and God says, that's not him. That's not the one. Jim Baker is the former Assemblies of God pastor. Many of you are familiar with him from a number of years back. He, along with his wife, Tammy Faye Baker, were the hosts of the PTL Club. In his book titled, I Was Wrong, he admits not only to moral failure, but also acknowledges it led many people astray by teaching theologically incorrect information. He said during that time in his life, he saw himself as ambitious, self-serving, and considered himself above the consequences. Any of us can do that. We can look at our heart and say, hey, I'm good here. I'm doing a lot of great things for God. But he was self-serving, ambitious, and above the consequences. Stature doesn't matter when it comes to diagnosis. And third, in diagnosis, testing reveals the true condition of the heart. Here are some cards, some gift cards that you will probably never see at Hallmark. Looking back over the years that we've been together, I can't help but wonder, what was I thinking? Second, I've always wanted to have someone to hold, someone to love. After having met you, I've changed my mind. As you grow older, Mom, I think of all the gifts you've given me, like the need for therapy. You are such a good friend that if we were on a sinking ship and there was only one life jacket, I'd miss you heaps and think of you often. Only true testing will reveal what our heart condition is. The test of time will often reveal what our heart condition is. The great physician will answer that question in verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. See, he's the great physician. He knows the true condition. In 1 Kings chapter 8 we read, For you only know the hearts of all the children of mankind. No matter how much I deceive myself, no matter how much I lie to anyone else, God knows the true condition of my heart. And His opinion is the only one that matters. If He speaks to me and says, Van, your heart is not right, I need to listen to His voice. God, I'm doing a lot of things for you. Your heart is not right. God, I'm serving as a pastor. Your heart is not right. I'm teaching people. Your heart is not right. I can deny, I can argue, I can debate. I've got to listen to His voice. Corrie ten Boom, in her book, Reflection of God's Glory, wrote, in Africa, a man came to a meeting, and he's got bandaged hands. And she asked how he'd been injured. He said he put out the fire that was on the roof of his house. She said, later I heard the entire story. A neighbor hated him and had come over and set fire to his house. His wife and children were in the house when the neighbor set fire to it. But when his house is on fire and he's putting out the flames, some of the sparks flew to this neighbor's home and set it on fire. And this Christian man goes to this house and puts out the fire. And that's where he burned his hands. God knows the true condition of your heart. What are you willing to do? What are we told to do? I'm just having this discussion with someone just before church began. What do we do with our neighbors? With our enemies? We love them. We're told to love our neighbors as ourselves. We're also told to love our enemies. Is it harder to love your enemies than it is your neighbor? Oh, yes. But God doesn't make a distinction. He says, if you have a heart like I have a heart, you're going to love your enemies just as you love your neighbors. Love them as yourself. And this man was a great example of that. In Isaiah 38, In those days, Hezekiah became sick and was at the point of death. And Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, came to him and said to him, Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die. You shall not recover. Then Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord and said, Please, O Lord, remember how I have walked before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart, and have done what is good in your sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. Then the word of the Lord came to Isaiah. Go and say to Hezekiah, Thus says the Lord, the God of David your father, I've heard your prayers. I've seen your tears. Behold, I will add 15 years to your life. Why did God choose to add 15 years? Hezekiah was honest with him. He said, I have walked before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart. God says, you know, you're right. And I appreciate that. I'm going to give you another 15 years to live. He does that for people. He does that for people who love him and who serve him. Gary Capley is a great example. 9 years fighting cancer when he was given a 2-month prognosis for life. God does that. But you have to have that whole heart. You have to be saying, I'm walking before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart and done what is good in your sight. Because God loves us. He's willing to give us. Now sometimes that time is less than we anticipate. We don't know. He doesn't treat everyone the same way. But he tests us. King Solomon spoke the test and provides this accurate diagnosis in Proverbs 27:19. As in water, face reflects face, so the heart of man reflects the man. What is your heart? God looks at more than just the face. We go to Vanderbilt, 16 hours we're there. I should have been on payroll after being there that long. And they're doing every test possible they can think of. At one point they say, okay, we want you to do a stress test. Whatever you say, you're the boss. And my pain has subsided at this point, but they still want me to do the stress test. And at that point in my life, I had some more time, and I was biking probably 100 to 120 miles a week. I'm on this other great fitness program. So, I'm blowing away their stress test. They find nothing there. But it's not enough for them. They said, we're going to do a nuclear stress test. Whatever you say, you're the boss here. So they did that. They did everything they could possibly think of. And they finally said, we have no idea what caused your pain. But you've got a great heart. God doesn't look at our physical heart. That's not his concern. His concern is our spiritual heart. He wants to know today, where are you? He says, the appearance that you have, that doesn't matter. How tall you stand, your stature, that doesn't matter. Only one thing does, and that's the testing. And I, the Lord, will test your heart. And I pray today that you say, Lord, check my heart. And maybe, Lord, I've never surrendered my heart to you, and I need to do that right now. Because I don't know that I'll get that other 15 years. You may not bless me in that fact. In fact, you may not give me the next 15 seconds, like Mike's friend who's out for a walk and drops dead of a heart attack. I've just encouraged you today, say, Lord, test my heart. Check me.